The chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with light. Crystals in the ceiling glowed like captured stars, casting long shadows across the floor of polished stone. Dozens of alien leaders sat high on curved platforms, their robes heavy with power and their faces cold with judgment. At the center of the hall stood a small group of humans, surrounded by guards. They looked tired, beaten, but their eyes were still sharp. They had come to hear the final decision, though deep inside they already knew what it would be. The voices of the council blended together like an echo from all corners of the galaxy. One alien with skin like molten silver leaned forward, his long fingers tapping the bench. He spoke in a slow, heavy tone that carried the weight of centuries. Humanity, he said, had broken too many laws. They had waged wars without permission, built weapons too dangerous, and acted without respect for the authority of the council. To the other species, humans were reckless, violent, and dangerous. They did not deserve to share the heart of the galaxy. The words cut deep, but the humans stood silent. Their leader, a woman in a plain gray uniform, clenched her fists at her side. She had fought battles, seen men and women die for survival, and now she stood in the middle of this glowing court being called primitive. Her jaw tightened, but she did not speak. Around her, the alien leaders sneered, their eyes filled with the arrogance of those who believed they would always rule. When the vote was taken, no voice defended humanity. Every hand, claw, or tentacle rose against them. The silver-skinned judge raised his staff, and the sound echoed like thunder. The verdict was clear. Exile. Humans were to be cast beyond the borders of the council, stripped of all protection, denied trade, and forbidden to return. They would be pushed into the uncharted dark where no aid would come, where pirates and hostile species roamed freely. To the council, it was not just punishment, it was a death sentence. The humans were allowed no chance to argue. The guards herded them back toward their ships like criminals. Some of the alien delegates laughed quietly, already imagining the humans scattering into the void, starving, their fragile bodies broken on strange worlds. Others did not laugh, but they did not help either. To them, the humans were nothing but a lesson, a warning of what happened when a species thought itself equal to the old powers. On the long walk back to their fleet, silence hung heavy among the humans. Children clutched their parents, confused why everyone looked so angry and afraid. Soldiers whispered to one another, their voices sharp with frustration. One of them finally muttered that it would be better to fight and die here in the Council's Golden City than to be sent into the darkness like beggars. But their leader stopped them with a single look. She reminded them that humanity had always been alone at the start. Earth itself had been unforgiving, yet they had survived. They would survive this too. The fleets were small compared to the vast armadas of the Council. Old ships patched together from years of conflict floated in the docking bays like rusted bones. Supplies were thin, weapons almost useless against the powers of the core worlds. Yet as the humans boarded, there was no sign of surrender in their eyes. They looked out at the shining cities of the Council one last time, not with sadness, but with defiance. The aliens thought this was the end. To the humans, it was the beginning of something they could not yet name. Engines roared, and the fleet drifted away from the glowing hubs of galactic trade. Behind them, the Council's borders closed like a cage, locking them out. Ahead lay only darkness, empty stars, and unknown dangers. Many wept quietly as the last familiar light faded, but even in the sorrow there was a strange spark, an ember of pride that no sentence could kill. Humanity had been exiled, but in that exile was freedom. No one would tell them what laws to follow. No one would call them primitive again. The Council believed they had banished a dangerous species forever. What they did not see was the fire they had lit. A people cornered, stripped of everything, would not simply vanish. They would endure. They would build. And one day they would return. Not as beggars, not as criminals, but as something far greater. The humans did not speak of revenge that day. They spoke of survival. They spoke of children who would need food, of ships that would need repair, of worlds that might one day be theirs. The exile was heavy, but it was not death. It was a challenge. And if there was one thing humanity had always done, it was rise to meet challenges no one else believed possible. The crystal chambers of the Council faded behind them, shining and proud, but already forgotten. The humans turned their eyes to the unknown stars, and for the first time in centuries, they felt truly free. The first months of exile were like drifting through a nightmare. The fleet of human ships, patched and weary, creaked as they moved farther from the shining worlds of the Council. Supplies ran thin faster than anyone had feared. Water filters clogged, crops in hydro bays withered, and sickness began to spread among the families huddled in cold metal corridors. Mothers whispered to their children, telling them stories of Earth's blue skies, though even those memories were beginning to feel like a dream. Soldiers patrolled the decks not against enemies, but against despair that threatened to consume everyone. Still, the fleet pressed forward. Scouts were sent ahead in small crafts, chasing whispers of habitable worlds. Most returned empty-handed, reporting systems of dead rocks or frozen wastelands. Some never returned at all, their signals vanishing into the black. Each loss cut into the already fragile hope that kept the people moving. There were nights when the stars outside felt more like watching eyes, mocking the weakness of the species that dared call itself strong. Yet among the chaos, something else began to grow. Humans argued, they fought, but they did not break. Engineers found ways to strip down broken ships and turn parts into working engines. Farmers experimented with strange alien seeds hidden away from old trade routes, coaxing them to grow in unfamiliar soils. Children, too young to understand the word exile, laughed in the corridors, their small voices echoing against the steel like stubborn defiance. Even in hunger and fear, humanity refused to die quietly. Pirates struck, circling the weakened fleet like vultures. Their ships were sleek and fast, armed with weapons far deadlier than what the humans carried. But instead of surrender, the humans fought with everything they had. Old cannons roared, boarding teams struck back with rifles and blades, and more than once a pirate vessel was rammed until it broke apart in fire. Losses were heavy, yet each battle proved something vital. Humans were not prey. They would not beg. They would not kneel. There came a day when one of the scout ships reported a system with a world that almost looked alive. It was harsh, scarred with storms and deserts, but it had an atmosphere that could be made breathable with work. The choice was clear. The fleet turned toward it, though no one knew if it would save them or kill them faster. As they approached, the planet loomed like a giant of rust and ash. Some wept with relief, others with fear. After endless drifting, they had found somewhere to land, somewhere to make a stand. The descent was chaos. Shuttles overloaded with people and cargo shook as they pierced the poisonous skies. Many crashed, burning in orange clouds, but enough made it to the surface. The first steps onto the soil were met with choking air and biting winds. Yet there was a strange strength in knowing they had touched ground again. It was not paradise. It was hostile and unforgiving. But it was theirs, and no council decree could take it away. Around campfires built from shattered ship plating, survivors began to whisper again, not of exile, but of beginnings. They had lost their place in the galaxy, but in this harsh place they might carve out something greater. The Council had sent them to vanish, but instead humanity had found a chance to rise. It was not hope that carried them through those nights. It was something sharper, harder, born from pain and exile. It was resolve, and it burned in every human heart. The planet fought against them from the very first day. Winds screamed across endless deserts, carrying dust so sharp it stripped paint from metal and tore holes in clothing. The soil was poisoned with strange minerals that killed every seed planted in it. Rivers existed only as dry scars on the land, and predators unlike anything from Earth stalked the night, their eyes glowing in the darkness just beyond the fires. Many thought they would not last a single year. Yet, the humans adapted. Engineers scavenged shipwrecks and turned scraps into machines that filtered the air. Hunters learned the patterns of the creatures that prowled the dunes, studying how they moved, how they struck, and how they could be killed. Farmers built sealed domes from broken hull plates, creating small green islands where stubborn plants clung to life. Slowly, painfully, survival began to turn into something stronger. Children who had never known the stars of Earth grew up with sandstorms as their lullabies and the sound of hammering steel as their music. They learned to fight before they learned to write, swinging makeshift blades at training dummies, their laughter wild with a courage even adults envied. They did not remember exile as shame, but as challenge. To them, the Council's judgment was not a curse, but the story of how humans were tested. The settlements spread outward from the first crash sites. What were once scattered camps became fortified towns. Towers of welded steel rose from the dunes, bristling with cannons carved from salvaged weapons. Walls were built not only to keep predators out, but to remind the people that this was their ground, claimed with blood and sweat. They did not ask permission. They did not beg for aid. They built because it was the only way forward. Stories of loss never stopped. Entire outposts vanished when storms tore them apart. Caravans sent for resources disappeared, swallowed by the wastelands. Graves dotted the sands, marked only by pieces of broken metal with names scratched in by hand. But with each death came a lesson, and with each lesson came new strength. The humans were learning to bend the world to their will. At night, leaders gathered around maps lit by flickering lamps, their faces worn, but their voices steady. They spoke not only of surviving, but of expanding. The planet's rocks hid metals rarer than gold, veins that could be mined and forged into tools the Council had never granted them. The skies could be conquered again, not with borrowed ships, but with new craft of their own design. Around those tables, the first ideas of something greater than survival began to form. What the Council thought would bury humanity was, in truth, forging it. Hardship became the fire in which they were tempered. The weak perished, but the strong endured, carrying the weight of all who had fallen. The planet was no paradise, but it was a crucible. Out of storms, hunger, and death, a new kind of human was born, tougher, sharper, and more dangerous than anything the galaxy had seen before. They had been exiled, cast aside as unworthy. But as the settlements grew, as the children laughed in the face of dust storms, and the hunters brought back trophies from beasts that once stalked them, one truth became clear. Humanity was not fading into the dark. Humanity was becoming something the Council could never have imagined. Years turned into decades, and the scars of the first days began to fade beneath the sound of progress. The broken ships that once lay scattered across the desert had been taken apart piece by piece, their bones reforged into towering structures of steel and glass. The settlements that began as camps of desperation transformed into cities of ambition, their lights burning defiantly against the endless storm-filled sky. Smoke rose from forges that never slept, and the sound of hammers striking metal echoed like a heartbeat across the land. No longer were the people content with mere survival. Engineers designed engines that could pierce the skies, built from alloys mined deep beneath the poisoned soil. Farmers turned deserts into controlled gardens sealed beneath vast domes, producing food that could feed not only their own, but future colonies yet to come. Scientists, no longer bound by alien restrictions, unlocked discoveries the Council had once forbidden. Ideas flowed freely, unchained by the arrogance of outsiders who had called them dangerous. Now that danger was turned into power. Children who had grown under storms were now leaders, their eyes sharp with vision. They gathered in vast halls carved into the rock, debating not how to live, but how to expand. The memory of exile had not left them. It burned within every word they spoke, but it no longer defined them as victims. Instead, it defined them as dreamers who would never again be caged. They began to speak of uniting under one banner, not for Earth, which was long lost to them, but for the future they were building with their own hands. Ships rose once more, not patched wrecks, but sleek vessels forged in human shipyards, designed to endure and to fight if needed. They were not as vast as the fleets of the Council, but each one was crafted with fierce precision, each crew burning with a pride the exiled could never have imagined carrying. Colonies were planned on nearby moons and stars, daring missions that pushed into the dangerous unknown. They were ready to suffer again if it meant growth, because suffering was nothing new. The first great gathering of leaders ended with a declaration spoken simply, without ceremony. Humanity would not hide. They would not linger on one broken world waiting to die. They would rise higher than the species who had condemned them, higher than the Council could ever imagine. The words spread across cities and camps like fire through dry grass, carried in songs and whispered prayers and shouts that echoed over steel walls. For the first time since exile, people did not look to the stars with fear, but with hunger. And so the spark of empire was born. not in grand palaces, not in halls of marble, but in the rough hands of miners pulling ore from stone, in the scarred faces of soldiers who trained under skies of dust, in the tired eyes of mothers who raised their children to dream bigger than survival. The empire was not yet real, but its bones had already been laid in steel, blood, and willpower. It waited only to be claimed. The first fleet to leave their harsh world carried no banners, no promises of peace. They carried only determination. Their ships cut through the void, heavier and darker than those of the Council, built for survival first and beauty never. The crews were restless, their eyes fixed on uncharted stars, their hearts driven by something sharper than hope. They were searching not for safe harbors, but for worlds to conquer with grit and will. The frozen moons were the first to fall under their hands. Ice cracked beneath drilling machines, releasing rivers of water that fed new colonies. From barren rocks, they pulled fuel, minerals, and secrets that other species had overlooked. In jungles where alien beasts ruled, humans built camps surrounded by fire, cutting paths with blade and flame until the forests bent to them. Every world seemed to resist, yet one by one they yielded. Humanity no longer asked permission to exist. They carved it from the universe. Their weapons grew as their reach expanded. Rail cannons thundered from orbit, driving metal slugs faster than light's shadow, tearing holes in ships and fortresses that believed themselves invincible. Soldiers wore armor crafted from alloys never seen in the Council's halls, and their strategies were born not of tradition, but of necessity. Each battle was a lesson, each victory a warning. Pirates and raiders who had once circled the exiles now fled at the sight of a human warship silhouette. Whispers began to drift across the galaxy. Merchants spoke of black-flagged fleets that defended their own with merciless fury. Smugglers carried tales of colonies rising where no species had dared to live. Even in the Council's proud chambers, officials muttered uneasily of humans who were no longer the weak outcasts they had cast away. Fear began to replace laughter whenever the word human was spoken. Among the new colonies, children grew up beneath banners stitched from scraps, symbols of unity in colors that marked no world but their own. They learned history not from books, but from the scars of their parents, who told them of exile, hunger, and the promise that they would never again bow to another's rule. To these children, space was not a void to fear. It was a frontier waiting to be claimed. When the first human empire was spoken of aloud, it was not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. The people had suffered, built, expanded, and defended themselves. Now the stars were opening wider, and the question was no longer whether humanity would endure, but how far they would go. What had begun as scattered survivors had grown into something larger than survival itself. The fire that exile had lit was spreading, and the galaxy had only begun to feel its heat. The day the Council first saw human warships again, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Across the borders where once only silence reigned, black steel leviathans appeared, their hulls scarred by storms and battles, but gleaming with power no one had expected. They moved in disciplined formation, not as ragged survivors, but as the arm of a rising empire. Each ship carried not just weapons, but the weight of decades of struggle, and their arrival was not a plea for acceptance, it was a declaration. The Council sent envoys draped in silk and arrogance. They demanded explanations, insisted the humans submit to oversight, reminded them of the laws that had once condemned them. But the humans did not bow. Their commanders stood with calm faces, voices steady, and answered with the truth. They had been exiled to die, and instead they had thrived. They had built cities, colonized worlds, forged fleets, and discovered sciences that the Council had hidden for centuries. They no longer needed permission, and they would never again ask for it. Behind the words stood proof. Colonies numbering in the hundreds, each carved out of impossible worlds. Shipyards spanning moons, producing vessels by the thousands. New engines that cut across the void faster than any drive the Council had ever allowed. Weapons that could turn planets into glass or shield them against entire armadas. The humans laid their achievements bare, not with pride, but with certainty, as though daring the galaxy to deny what was already real. For the first time in living memory, the Council felt unease ripple through its chamber. Those who had once mocked humanity now whispered of danger. Those who had laughed at their weakness now questioned whether the exiles had outgrown them all. The records that named humans primitive suddenly felt like relics from a foolish age. And yet, pride and fear kept the council from admitting what their eyes already told them. The outcasts had returned, and they were no longer outcasts. Among the humans, there was no desire to kneel, no thirst to beg for re-entry. Instead, there was only resolve. The exiled had built a place in the stars greater than the council had ever offered. And now, standing on the edge of the old power's domain, they carried a single message in every action, every warship, every burning engine that pierced the night. Exile had not ended humanity. Exile had remade them into something the galaxy could no longer ignore. The Council's pride would not let them yield. They gathered their grand fleet, thousands of ships forged over centuries, banners of every powerful species flying side by side. To them, it was unthinkable that exiles, once ragged and starving, could now stand equal. They marched into the void expecting a show of dominance, a reminder that order was theirs to command. But when they met the human fleets, they did not find fear. They found silence, precision, and a calm readiness that unsettled even the proudest admirals. The first volleys shook the stars. Council warships unleashed energy weapons bright as suns, confident in their overwhelming firepower. Yet human vessels absorbed the storm, with shields layered in new designs and answered with fury. Rail cannons thundered, hurling slugs that tore through hulls as if they were paper. Missiles split into swarms mid-flight, chasing their prey with mechanical hunger. Where the Council fought with tradition, the humans fought with adaptation, every maneuver honed by decades of survival in hostile space. Losses came heavy to both sides, but humanity fought as though every battle was the last stand of their species. Crews sealed breaches with their bare hands, soldiers boarded enemy vessels with nothing but blades and stubborn resolve, and captains rammed their ships into enemy flagships when weapons failed. For every human vessel destroyed, 2 Council warships were dragged down in its wake. What began as a campaign of intimidation twisted into a nightmare the Council could not control. The longer the war raged, the clearer the truth became. The humans did not fight only for territory. They fought for pride, for freedom, for the memory of being cast out like criminals. Their commanders turned exile into strategy, striking where no enemy expected, using desperation as a weapon. Entire Council fleets fell to ambushes in asteroid fields, traps woven with brutal cunning. The galaxy had laughed at human unpredictability. Now that same unpredictability was rewriting the rules of war. By the time the Council realized the danger, it was too late. Their fleets, once thought unbreakable, were scattered across burning systems. Their generals, who had never known true defeat, stared in disbelief as reports confirmed loss after loss. And at the center of it all, the human empire advanced, not with cries of conquest, but with a silence that spoke louder than any boast. They would never again be forced to kneel. The stars bore witness as the old powers crumbled against a people they had once dismissed. What was meant to be the end of humanity had become the clash that would define the galaxy forever. In exile, they had been forged. In war, they had proven unbreakable. And now, the Council faced the unthinkable truth. They had created the very force that would one day eclipse them. The war ended not with a treaty signed in marble halls, but with silence across the stars. Council fleets no longer patrolled the borders. Their broken hulls drifted in forgotten systems as monuments to arrogance. Worlds that once sneered at the name of humanity now sent envoys wrapped in humility, seeking trade and protection. The humans did not march into the Council's chambers demanding crowns. They did not enslave or burn. Instead, they stood as equals, unyielding, unashamed, and undeniable. Trade routes opened again, but now it was human merchants who dictated the terms. Caravans of iron and grain, ships laden with medicine and technology, flowed from colonies once believed impossible to build. Where other species saw barren rock, humans had carved thriving cities. Where storms raged, they raised spires that touched the clouds. They had turned exile into mastery and mastery into power. Children born after the exile no longer carried the bitterness of their parents. They grew up under banners of a rising empire, taught that freedom was not a gift, but something earned through sweat and sacrifice. They studied maps of hundreds of worlds claimed by human hands, their eyes filled not with fear, but with hunger for the next frontier. The Council had once called humanity dangerous. Now they called them indispensable. In the great capital city built on their first ash-filled world, a statue rose higher than any tower. It did not show a king or a conqueror. It showed a ragged refugee, one hand clutching the broken chain of exile, the other reaching toward the stars. Around its base were carved words that every human knew by heart. We were cast out to die. We chose to live. The galaxy understood at last that exile had not ended a species. It had given birth to an empire. And in every corner of space, from the deepest mines to the grandest courts, the lesson echoed with quiet certainty. Never again would humanity be underestimated, for they had turned punishment into destiny and built an empire beyond imagination.